Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Big Breakdown podcast with me, your host Chris Stafford. And as always, I'm joined by Mr. Harrison Marshall. Harrison, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Good, thank you. Just living my best life, living the dream.
Busy week?
Well, as busy as lockdown can be. Just tray bakes and day drinking at the moment, and plenty of Zoom
Nice.
calls. Plenty of Zoom calls. Yourself?
They're fairly similar, yeah. It's all about the day drinking. Um, so this week, we're sort of following on from what we were discussing in the last podcast around understanding the who, so really getting an idea of who you're coaching and how to develop things such as movement skills, really. So this week we're joined by a former colleague of mine, Mr. Kristian Sharples. Kristian did his undergrad degree at Leeds Beckett University in sports coaching, then joined the Rugby Football Union as a community rugby coach. After a few years, decided he wanted to pursue his dream in strength and conditioning. So left and went back to Leeds Beckett to do his masters in strength and conditioning, and now has his own company, Bearface Conditioning, which he's here to talk to us about today. So, Kristian, hello.
Hey up, Stas, how you doing?
Good mate.
Harrison?
Welcome to the coffee table. How's your lockdown going? What's new?
It's fairly steady. I mean, I've not hit the day drinking yet, so I'm a little bit behind you boys. But yeah, getting through okay. More burpees than beers.
He's more of the athlete, I think, than I am currently.
That's the phrase I think we all need in our life: more burpees than beers.
So one of the reasons we wanted to try and get you on, Sharpie, is to just talk about movement skills and coaching within S&C, especially within community clubs and rugby. But first of all, if you just give us a bit of a background to you, your journey, and what sort of led you to where you are now.
Yeah, so like you said in your intro, I sort of two big points in my coaching career so far. I've been doing my undergraduate in sports coaching at Leeds Beckett, and then recently going back there and doing a master's in strength and conditioning. But I suppose my coaching journey starts way before that. Ended up sort of doing the classic thing as everybody does who's a sporty kid at school. You get shoved on the sports leader course, and sort of asked to take some primary school kids for some sports days and that sort of stuff. And that was probably where my interest in coaching started. And then it kind of just snowballed from there. I ended up doing my work experience in year 11 with uh, Leeds Carnegie in their community team, which I'd later go back and join as a manager. So that was quite a strange experience. But yeah, did my work experience there, did some work experience at Bradford Bulls in their player pathway. And at that point decided that obviously going down the university route into that degree was where I wanted to go. And then since then, I've just had a chance to coach a range of teams, a range of sports. So I coached a local rugby team for 7 years. Took one of their junior teams all the way through from under 12s to Colts. Uh, Set up a girls section at the club, and then, like you said, ended up coming out of uni with a fairly good job as a community rugby coach for the RFU. Worked with them for 3.5 years, and then moved down to Yorkshire Carnegie in the last 2 years to manage their community team. And like you said, kind of moved out of the world of community sport and community development into S&C and performance. And I'm currently working for myself with Bearface Conditioning, and also working part-time with Blackburn Rovers Ladies RCT as their performance coach.
So you've alluded to there. You've coached in quite a lot of different environments and got a lot of different experiences. Like I said at the start, a lot of this is going back to generally understanding who we're coaching.
Yeah.
What's important in this respect for you in the environments that you've been in, and what have you learned around that?
I think one of the main things when you do go across environments, that only enhances your ability as a coach to understand who you're working with. I think it's helped my coaching that a significant amount of my time coaching has actually been spent with people who had never wanted to play rugby or never even known what rugby is, and the whole idea of two of my main goals has been to actually get people to enjoy a game that they've never even heard of. And
yeah,
then
I found that as well with the with the RFU. You're going into these schools with a bunch of people in PE who majority of them don't actually want to be there. They're there because they have to be there. So you've got to provide them with that experience that's going to at least let them enjoy that, what, 30 minutes out of an hour lesson that you actually end up getting with them. And does it gives you some skills that go into a wider, that will help in wider environments, I suppose.
Oh, definitely. Because I mean, once you've kind of cracked or you've found a way of working with people that you've got to convince or bring along with you, when you end up going into the community and working with a group of young girls or young boys who actually want to do that and want to do that activity, whether that be rugby, football, cricket, tennis, whatever they've chosen to do, you've already got that buy-in, you've already got that motivation that you don't have to sell in those other environments. So I think probably one of the best skills that a coach can learn or understand about who they're coaching is what their motivation is and why they're there and what they not only why they're there and why they've turned up, but also what they want to kind of get out of it on the back end. So we've all coached a group of kids where you'll have some kids that really want to be there, really want to learn and become actually better at that activity. You've got some that really want to be there, but it's more of a social aspect because they want to be there with their friends and interact. And you've also got those ones that have just been dropped off by the parents and don't want to be there. But ultimately, your job as a coach is still to make that a positive experience for them.
Yeah, well, just wanted to jump on that. Just a question to both of you, really, as you both worked as CRCs working in schools. Have you got any kind of like examples in which you don't have to name names, but any examples in which you've had to create a session that is catered for both a group of players that wanted to be there and some didn't, and what actually that might look like?
Do you want me to dive in on that, Staffs?
Well, that's a standard life of a CRC, isn't it? I think. But yeah, no, by all means,
Yeah, I think one interesting thing you said there, Harrison, is actually you just identified everybody there as a player.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that I know when me and Staffs worked together in some of the schools in sort of inner city Leeds is we actually went in with the premise of rugby is a game for all.
Yeah.
Including you don't have to be a player. And some of the motivation in some of those groups was actually you'd have some a participant that maybe physically and tactically and technically didn't fit in as a rugby player, but actually they kind of understood how to maybe do a little bit of coaching or actually referee, and they were more confident to do that and do a different role that wasn't a player. But like Chris said, that allowed them to have half an hour where it was positive. So they weren't going home. They weren't going home to the mum and saying, "Have you had a good day in PE?" And usually it'd be, "Yeah, we did rugby. I hated it." It was actually, "Yeah, we did rugby, and I refereed the game," or "I gave an idea for a game and we did that, and the whole class did my idea."
I think that's a massive change of where that job had come as well, Sharpie, because when I started there in 2008, and it was very much then you were just fun facilitating. You were going into schools and just doing an hour as a break for the staff, and sometimes they came out with you, sometimes they didn't. And then that change became a lot more professional in terms of how you approach the session. You made the teachers come out, but then we started to cover some of them key other skills that comes with rugby, which you're promoting the treads, the teamwork, respect, enjoyment, discipline, and sportsmanship, but then the young leadership skills that came sort of alongside that, and supporting them to be in rugby in a different way.
Yeah,
and I think that's something that me, you, and Nick, I think we massively did push that in Leeds. I think we got a good return, especially with the All Schools program.
Yeah, I think so. I think sort of on the, like I say, not just what gets them to the session, but then what keeps them coming back, and then also what they get out on the back end. Like we probably had some kids turn up to those sessions who actually at first decided to take that role as a referee or as a coach or as a just assisting us, that then 2 weeks in decided actually I'll have a go at doing a tackle or a pass, and 3 weeks after that, they're right in the middle of it, tackling, kicking, passing, scrummaging, and then next thing you know, they're off down to a local club. And it was just a way to give them some confidence into the game that wasn't just, right, you're all going to stand there, everybody's going to hit this tackle pad, and you're going to get wiped out if you don't like it, sort of approach.
Oh, I think we call that the 1980s approach.
However, we could probably name some clubs, which obviously we won't be doing stuff, but we could probably name some clubs that would still take that approach probably even today.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's another minefield altogether, I think. So, like I said, one of the reasons we want to get you on is I think we've covered some really good stuff there around, it sort of follows on quite nicely for what me and Harrison spoke about last time around understanding the who and what that looks like in a more practical environment. So, I think one of the key things is when we look at movement skills and what to coach and how to coach them, there's a lot of people tend to go and deliver these sessions how they experienced it or what they believe to be right. But I think just as a starting point, and this probably will open up to a big chunk of what the conversation will then probably go down now, is when it comes to stuff like movement skills, what key things do we need to be aware of between when coaching kids through to adults, and why is this important that we're aware of these differences?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question, and obviously immediately you've already identified two different groups. You've identified kids and adults, so there's always going to be some differences. Immediately I'm thinking, there's different stages of maturation, different ages, and the sort of actual physical biological things that brings with it. But probably from a little bit of a different perspective is probably like a social cultural aspect to it, in terms of, I think from my experience, older groups haven't had the opportunity to have fundamental skills coached to them, or probably not as deliberately as the younger children are today. So, for example, most of my coaching experience has been with either children or youth athletes. However, I've coached some senior teams, and there's always the person that whose movement maybe moves a little bit incorrectly or it looks a bit funny. And one example I can give you is I actually was coaching a senior team going their S&C, and I probably had 3 or 4 players that when they ran there with the same arm and same leg on the same side. So obviously as the right leg goes up, your left arm should go up to counterbalance you, but they would run right arm, right leg, and left arm, left leg together. And we obviously picked up on that and sort of tried to coach them out of it. But because they'd done that for so many years, that had just become habitual and a movement pattern and a movement skill that they'd learned, that's how they did it. And that's probably like, in my experience, that's probably a big difference at the moment, is that if you've never been taught this, so if you're in that adult bracket that's never been taught this, or someone's never picked up on it, you might have something like that, or if somebody's never picked up on even like a really subtle thing, how much better could you have been? And I suppose the ultimate thing for maybe the adult group is relating to sort of reducing injury risk and health, is if somebody's got some sort of impingement or some sort of movement skill that actually means that their quality of movement and quality of life is then impacted on, have they at some point in their sporting career picked up an injury because of that? And then effectively that injury could, have any number of impacts on their sport or their life. Whereas I think if you take it the other way, then we look at the kids, is actually as coaches now and community coaches and professional coaches, you still can impact that. You can still reform, or you can just coach from the beginning these movement patterns and movement skills that reduces the risk of injury, improves people's health, both in a sporting context and out of a sporting context, and then actually then improves performance.
So with that though, first of all, it's nice to know that you've used Chris as an example. Of the way he runs is always a bit fun. I've not really seen him run, but
I was going to say that's your big point there, isn't he doesn't run.
Yeah,
you have seen me play rugby though, unfortunately, Harrison, and that's not a pretty sight.
That's definitely a walk.
No, that's why he keeps hashing up these old clips of him at Twickenham. But no, with that, it's when we're coaching kids these fundamental movements. How important is it to get that balance between teaching them these movements, but also keeping them engaged and actually committed to those sessions? Have you found that a difficult balance to coach?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that is where coaches need to be probably a little bit honest with themselves and say, that is a situation I'm finding, like, to coach people how to run, or to coach people how to just even walk properly, or leap, or jump, or some really fundamental basic movements. That might be quite monotonous, that might be quite boring, but you don't have to make it that. One tactic or one sort of coaching tool I use for that is it's almost like a disguise approach of this is the activity, this is what we're looking for, and we're just going to do it in a fun way. So I'll give you one example. I've actually seen it coached really well. I was at a local rugby club, and they were doing relays with I think it was like their under sixes, under sevens, and they were doing relays. Lots of different movement skills in there, lots of different like fundamentals, and kind of one of the really good things that they did, and this is a tool I use, is they were rewarding the quality of the movement rather than the actual just out and out winner of the race. So they still had sort of all the old schoolyard rules where it's tag your partner, first team back, sit on the floor, or I think they were even doing stuff like first team back, I'll have to balance on one leg again, looking at a fundamental movement skill. But ultimately then they had winners of the race, but the overall winners were the team with the best quality of movement. So I know, some of your coaching thing is like that constraints-based approach, or using different methods of scoring. That's kind of just a similar thing to that, of just twisting that focus slightly of, okay, we're looking for, say, these 3 coaching points on running. That's actually how you win, is you do those 3 things to a good quality, rather than you just run and you win the race. Because then ultimately, if you can keep doing these 3 things consistently, that's going to make you win the race anyway.
Because you'll have the movement skills to be able to do that. So just then to sort of the whole focus of what we want to try and achieve with these discussions is to come up with the examples of what people can actually go out and deliver. So just a few scenarios at you then really, what would find, like you've said there around under 6, what sort of movement activity should I be focusing on between that early stage of development?
So I think probably one way I'd look at it, and maybe just rephrase that slightly, is often when I speak to coaches about this, they're very much like, well, when do I have time to do it in a session? I've got to coach this, I've got to coach. So if we take rugby, for example, I've got to coach tackle, I've got to coach catch, pass. We've then got to do our unit work, and then we've got to do a team run, and we've only got an hour to do it because the seniors are coming and they'll kick us off the pitch. And there's one thing that I think universally coaches will do at a session. Well, I say will do. There's universally one thing that happens at a session is a warm-up. Everybody kind of understands that some form of warm-up should happen. However, what do most warm-ups look like in the community? It's generally either a game of touch and pass that maybe the coach, constrains, or maybe then turns into the kids just ending up playing full contact, or the kids go for a jog around the field, like proper Kez style, and then they do a stretch in each corner, but they're leading it. The kids are leading the activity.
Which brings on to a point anyway, because how can the kids lead on the activity when they're not sure of the movement patterns that they should be able to do themselves?
Exactly. So who ends up leading that is generally either the most confident person in the group, or who the coach has identified as the captain or leader. And again, that's generally not that person's leading that because they've got the best movement skills and can actually articulate that the best. That's just because they've probably got the loudest voice and can be at the front of that run. So my question there would be, what are you coaching during a warm-up? are you actually coaching? What is your role? Whereas I think this is where you can actually do, you probably always set aside 10, 15 minutes for a warm-up. That's your opportunity as a coach to dedicate some time to coaching fundamental movement skills. And again, you can maybe play some sort of game, do the relays. I mean, I used to do relays with the senior team I coached. They absolutely loved it. Everybody turns into a big kid. They love it. We've done sessions with university students where we open up with a game of TIG or a game of stuck in the mud or some variation of that, and everybody loves it. Then all I'm saying is added a layer into that. So okay, we're going to go play a game of stuck in the mud. Okay, when you tug, instead of then you standing there and you're out of the game, once you've performed 3 really good quality squats or really good quality RDLs or whichever movement you want to do, you're back in the game. But you base that entry on quality. So whether that's people have to go to a certain area to do them so you can see them as a coach, okay, and you can actually coach them through that movement, then they can re-enter the game. And if we go back to that kind of idea of motivation, well, what do the kids really want to do there? They really want to get in the game and run around, don't they? So if you really underpin the idea of, well, if you have to come over here and perform this movement skill with quality before you can go back into the game, I guarantee you, suddenly everybody will be performing really good quality skills because they want to get back into the game. But then ultimately they're getting a really good learning experience. So rather than doing 40, average squats, they might only get caught a couple of times, but actually they come out and they do 15 or really high quality squats, and then you're honing and they're learning the correct movement pattern every time they do it.
I think that's a really interesting way of thinking it, and to be honest, I think that's not something I've really, as a coach, I've not considered as much. I don't think I've worked with kids that age, but I think hearing you and learning is it's important that we could be doing this at even at a high level, that maybe even a university level, to try and coach out those bad habits.
Harrison, I think that's a really good point. Like, that is a universal thing. Like I said, that you could do that with under 6s.
Yeah,
you could do that with a senior team. As I say, in my current role, in a football pathway, that is a practice we use. It might be a little bit different. We might have different specific focuses on it. So obviously, rather than running around with a rugby ball, they'll probably dribble a football, or they might do a football specific movement. But the idea is still the same.
Yeah,
it's just twisting that focus slightly.
Even if they're holding the ball, they're still working on some things like object control still in a different way, rather than just looking at the feet. It's just how you hold it. It's developing another form of the skill, isn't it?
Exactly.
So I suppose you made some really, really good points there, Sharpie, about how we can start to introduce these. I suppose the next question sort of would be is if I'm still at that age group, then as a coach, I've then not been taught these movements myself. What would be the best way for me to make sure that I am coaching it correctly? Because there's a lot of stuff around, how we need to be aware of these key critical features of the skills to be able to know what we can fault correct, to know what good technique looks like. So what would your advice be for the parent who would that probably listen to this now, say, well, I don't have time to go and research what that movement looks like? Well, is there a way that they can learn that in an effective way that's not going to take them loads of time? And I know time is difficult to measure that respect, but is it possible?
Yeah, I think if you're sat there as either a parent or a coach in community rugby and you're thinking, actually, this is something I need to work on, you probably will find some time to do it. I think the easiest thing to do is there's plenty of material out there on the internet, on YouTube, videos of how to perform these really basic movements. And they're probably not as complicated as people probably think they are. And you could certainly boil them down to like 2 or 3 coaching points for each, that if people can do consistently, then their movements will be absolutely fine. So for example, let's take a squat. We can boil a squat down to 3 easy coaching points that everybody can utilize and use. So for example, I'd always start with feet. So feet shoulder width apart. Okay, so we've got our starting position. Then what's the actual movement? Well, we're sitting down and back, so we're not going too far forward. So feet shoulder width apart, sitting down and back. Okay, and then how do I come back up? Well, I just push through the middle part of my foot. That's it. And probably in a weird way, the best people to actually watch doing fundamental movement skills are toddlers who haven't been exposed to the wrong ways of moving yet. You watch a toddler sit down or squat, that squat form is absolutely like pretty much perfect. Just because, again, there's some biological things in play that, the muscle mass and the ligaments and tendons sort of play a part there, that they've got the flexibility to do that. But ultimately, because they've not been taught the wrong way to do it, or they've not learned the wrong way to do it through habit, their movements are really good.
I used to reference that quite a lot on the old level 1 on the fundamental movement section, because one of the first things we learn without even realizing is how to sit up, because as a baby, when you're born, you just lay there. You learn to sit up, you learn to crawl, you learn to walk, because you can't verbally communicate with people. It's just learn on the observations that you make.
Yeah.
But you're right, then eventually we start to develop, I suppose, bad practice because we're not reinforcing positive movement patterns.
And again, so quite a lot of that comes back to probably like society. What's the first thing that we do with kids at school? We sit them down at a table. And then what do they consistently do until the 16, 17, 18 now? Sit at a table. What do they do?
Xbox or a computer.
What do they do when they leave school? Most people end up sitting at a table.
Well, that's the point, because toddlers are non-stop active as well, aren't they? They're constantly moving around, they're crawling, they're climbing, they're being a nuisance from my experience.
Well, yeah. But I think part of that also that you sort of alluding to there is they're always exploring movement. And I think people might get hung up here on fundamental movement skills and fundamental movement like patterns and making sure that they're, say, following a technical model. And I have just given an example there of a technical model of a squat. But ultimately, there is some room for people to be creative within that. So people will squat slightly differently, people will run differently. But if that means that they're fundamentally safe and healthy doing that, and it kind of works for them, then that's okay as well. I always use the example of who's the American 200, 400 meter runner? Johnson on the BBC now. Michael Johnson. Yeah, Michael Johnson. So the always thing with him was that he ran funny. Well, okay. Well, my thing was as a performance coach with theirs, okay, maybe he's not a perfect technical model, but is he safe? Does he get injured? And ultimately, does he win? And he does all those things. So I'd be a bit like, leave him to it. What he's doing works.
I think that's always difficult for coaches though, because it's that age-old question of when does the technical aspect outweigh the outcome. So when does if they're hitting the outcome and they're doing it in a safe manner, when do we have to step in and make that technical adjustment?
That's a really good question, and that's probably one I don't have the answer to. Your view on that will be totally different to mine, Harrison, as Chris's will. And again, that probably comes back to the theme of our chat of understanding the who. So if you're making that call on, let's say, a kid who's potentially going down an academy pathway where ultimately data and outcomes actually do matter, there might be a conversation around, as long as they're safe, does it matter? Whereas if we're looking at somebody who's just playing recreational rugby, but actually long-term wants to do some other sports and other activities, then my perspective on it would be, well, actually, why don't we just kind of maybe do some movement correction to make sure that they can do those other activities, that they can go play cricket during the summer, that they can, do the triathlon that they're trying to do for charity and stuff like that. Like you say, context, but again, understanding the who of that person and what they want to get out of it is probably a big aspect to that.
I think it's a solid point, and I think I probably definitely agree. It's it's that age old question. It's that age old phrase of what works for who in that context.
Yeah.
But no, yeah.
I think like that can also change. Like people's context changes constantly. So one week it might be, okay, we are going to do some movement correction here, and we are going to focus on that. And a year, 2 years later, months later, it might be actually the focus is going to shift slightly, and the amount of tackles or the amount of line breaks are now more important.
Yeah, and I think that links back to quite nicely to what we chatted about on the last podcast around we've always got to got to constantly review the who aspect of your coaching practice.
Oh yeah.
Especially when you're working with young players or young people, they're constantly changing. Their bodies are changing. They're progressing at different rates, and I think too many times coaches get stuck in that old rut that it's and not being aware of how those players are progressing through. I think is one thing that catches coaches out, and I know that I've seen it, and I know that I probably fell fair of that before as well.
I think you've brought up a really good point there, like around coaches getting caught out, and this is where I have empathy with community coaches of some of the concepts of, say, physical development. People just don't understand and they don't know about it. So if you don't know about it, how can you correct it? How can you deal with it? So one good example there that I use quite a lot is, as we're sort of getting into adolescence and sort of around the age group that I work with at the moment, children and youth athletes are going through that growth spurt and starting to grow a lot, and often actually their technical ability tends to get sort of impacted on, and that kind of makes sense in a way because they're growing. So you always use the analogy of that, the kid that goes, is your best player, is your fly half, really good cash pass skills, comes back after the summer holidays, the break, comes into pre-season, he can't catch anything. He suddenly hasn't become a really bad player overnight. His hands are just 2 inches further out in front of him than he's got used to. So the ball and his hands are where he expects them to be in his head because he's spent 18 months with his hands slightly further back.
That's because your nerve endings are the longest to actually catch up to the rest of it, doesn't it? The muscles and the bones grow quicker. The nerve endings take a while to catch up, which is why they think there's that different point of the
correct
contact, isn't it?
So that was quite a good rugby in that. And I remember speaking to a group of coaches and they were like, "Oh yeah, we all know that kid." And it's like, yeah, well, then you berating them for dropping a ball now and again, it isn't going to do anything from their psychosocial development, and also it's not their fault. What's the best thing you can do? Yeah, you could actually just understand that this might be a consideration for it, of that they're growing, and help them to understand that. I think that's probably one thing that I did learn at the RFU and through my coaching is kids are really clever. Kids are a lot smarter than people give them credit for. So actually engage them in the conversation about what's happening. Let them understand what you're doing and why you wanted to do it. I'll give you a good example recently. So start working at the football club at the RCT, and the kind of girls' view on coming and doing S&C was, it's something we've just got to come and do. It's half an hour that we're not playing football. We'll get it done and then we'll go back. Until I started changing some of the ideas around it for the girls and explaining why they were doing what I was asking them to do, and then also why it related to what they were doing on the pitch. And then once you kind of make them connections of, oh, well, we're doing this because it's going to help me not be injured, which means then I can be available more to play, which means I can play more football. Suddenly that buy-in comes. And then it's just really simple about then, like we said earlier, about changing practices and finding other people's different motivation to why they want to do stuff. But I definitely think as a community coach, one thing is engage your participants with that, bring them along with you. And again, I understand that maybe some coaches don't want to do that because ultimately they probably don't know why they're doing something. Well, if you don't know why you're doing something, my question is, why are you doing it? If you don't know why you're doing it, don't do it. Or go and find out why you're doing it and then you can actually make an informed decision on what you're doing.
And that is the hope of what this is all about, that we're doing, is to try and give coaches that little bit of background to help them understand why these things such as warm-ups are so important, because they do play a wider role for us to develop our athletes to become better at the sport specific skills that we then focus on in the main part of our session.
Definitely.
So I suppose that sort of comes on to the next bit I wanted to really sort of ask you about is, you talked about the best time to do this would be in a warm-up, because the best time to actually cover it. What would be best to structure that? Is there anything out there that you would, and how would you advise coaches to then do that?
Cool. So when I do my warm-ups, I use a protocol called RAMP. So RAMP warm-up, some people might be aware of it, some people might not be. It basically is an acronym for raise, activate, mobilize, and potentiate. So I can just take you through each one of those if you like, and give you some examples of maybe what.
Yeah, no, I think that would be great, mate. Yeah, I think that would be a bonus, and it just probably add that clarity about, well, actually we've covered the importance of why these movement patterns need to be included in it, and that might then just give them a way about, well, actually, how could I structure then that warm up to make sure that they are included? I think that would be a huge help.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'll take you through it step by step. So raise really basically is kind of what it says on the tin, is an activity or a game or something that's going to get there, that's aiming to increase blood flow and heart rate. So
let's just add there, that's not running around the field and doing stretches on each one. That's an actual activity.
That depends. If you said a run around the field would raise heart rate and would increase blood flow. So again, I'll take you through what warm up I'm doing currently with the girls at the RCT. So, but my thing as a coach there, not just a warmer upperer, is I want to engage them as well. So what else can I layer into that raise that's going to help either later on in the session or kind of just help generally? So at the moment, our girls will get on field, and just to kind of let them unwind a little bit, get their heads ready for the training session, they'll go through this raise by doing 4 widths of the pitch, but they have to take a ball. And if they don't have a ball, they have to have touched a ball either a certain amount of times, or sort of they'll go in pairs and they'll do passes between. So if we're looking at that from a holistic point of view, I'm getting my raise in as a performance coach. I'm getting them warm, the blood's increasing, blood flow's going, but they're also actually getting some technical practice. They're getting some psychological benefits of, maybe having a bit of unwind and actually now starting to focus on what they're about to do in the session. And they're also getting some social engagement without me telling them or they can't talk, and they get a little bit of time just to prep themselves. And they know they've got a certain amount of time. They've got 4 widths of the pitch. And then we just start layering stuff on that. So one kind of rule or constraint we put in on that is that the 3rd and 4th widths have to be faster than the first 2. And again, that's probably their judgment, but the athletes that I'm working with can judge that they're going faster. And I think most people would be able to do that you can see that you're probably going from a light jog into a bit more of a pacey jog into a run into a, probably not a sprint at this point. But
I suppose that even if you understand the people that you're with, you could constrain that a little bit more in terms of what you expected to see at that point. So you could maybe start with a walk to build to a jog. That way, if you felt as though you needed to. So,
oh yeah, right? You definitely could. And again, there as a coach, if you could add specific movement skills into that. So, run 1 might be a jog, run 2 might be a run 3 you might be leaping all the way, run 4 they might be doing bunny hops. You can play around with something like that, and again, you can add technical things into that. But again, as a coach in this point, it's just about focusing on what you want to get out of it. So yeah, I give the girls a ball and get them to dribble with it, but I'm not coaching them on their ability to dribble and pass, and I'm not bothered about that. I'm not watching that. I'm just watching, are they doing the last 2 runs quicker than the first 2? And that's my focus. But I'm engaging the girls by giving them a ball, because that's what they ultimately want to come and do, is play football. Does that kind of make some sense?
Yeah, I just wanted to just add to that. It's I think coaches got to be careful with that. I know that some coaches will they'll have the ball in, and then they'll get focused on that skill aspect of what they're doing with the ball, when actually we've got to realise that at this point we're just looking to raise that body temperature, raise the blood flow and the pulse. So yeah, I think it was just I think it was a nice point just to say that at that point we're just warming up. We're not looking at any technical aspects of our sport. We're just preparing them to get ready to engage.
100%, Harrison. 100%, and that's where as a coach you've almost. I mean, I understand that maybe most community coaches are either coaching by themselves or maybe in pairs. That's where you as a coach or a coaching team have got to be fairly disciplined with yourself. And so we've got in a rugby context, the passing, everybody drops the ball now and again. That don't matter as long as they pick it up and run on with it. That's what we're focusing on. So I'll move on to the next bit. And these two tend, when I've spoken to people, they kind of think that they sound similar, but they are kind of different. So the next one we've got is activate. So activation is now we're switching on the specific muscle groups we're going to use. So for example, for football, for rugby, for pretty much any game sport, we're looking at sort of a global warm-up. We're looking at warming up pretty much every muscle in our body. But again, with specific, maybe a little bit more specific focus on certain bits. I mean, we can get as detailed in if you're working with a senior team or a university team, like I know you guys do. You'll look at position specific stuff potentially. So that's where that might be coming in. Generally, this is done for me in the form of some dynamic stretching or like a warm up flow or a movement flow. So again, I'll just give you the example of what we're using at Blackburn at the minute. So the girls will come over, they'll put all the balls at the side, and they'll just start performing 10 reps of we do squats, hip hinges, inchworms, spider stretch, where you bring your foot up by your hand and rotate out just to open up those hips, glute bridges. It's basically just a form of dynamic stretching to just start activating and switching on those muscles and those neural pathways. The difference between activate then and mobilize is now we're going to work in specific movements. So rather than the group doing dynamic squats, let's say, but in a stationary position, we'll now go into maybe doing lunges, or we're going to do some shuffles, or we'll actually start to work some movement patterns or some movement skills that they're going to actually use. So for example, our girls will do quite a lot of run, then into a rotation and run again, or like a run turn run. They'll do lots of side shuffles to open up the hips and the groins, so they're ready for the passing skills as well. And again, this might be, we put it into a rugby context for you, the mobilize might be actually you're going to do some form of maybe like bear crawl or some sort of movement like that that's a bit lower to the ground, much like a ruck, a scrum. But it's starting to basically build up and starting to now look a little bit like the foundations of what they're about to do. So you kind of, if you think about it, like you're warming it up with your raise, you activate, you're just switching everything on. And now we're actually starting to build the foundations movement-wise of what the activity we're about to do. And then potentiate, the last one is an activity of really high intensity that is pretty much of game speed. So in my context at the moment, what the girls will do is we actually stop our warm-up at M. So we actually do raise, activate, mobilize on a game. Sorry, this is on a game day. So they'll do the raise, activate, mobilize. They'll go off and do their technical warm-up. So like some form of keep ball, goalkeepers will do some saves, with the strikers doing some shots, and then they'll come back, and the last thing they do before they enter the field is they'll do the potentiation. So they'll come back and they'll perform a number of sprint exercises and a mix of plyo into sprint before we play a game. It's a little bit different at training, because obviously they're going to go and do a bigger block of technical after the warm-up, so we potentiate. And with the potentiation at training, I actually try and make it again fun and play some games with it, because, well, what better way to get somebody to compete at their highest ability than make it a competition? And I've just answered my own question there. But especially with kids and young people, if I say to them, right, I need you to sprint as hard as you can, well, you're always going to get them 2 or 3 people that don't do it. And, oh yeah, I am sprinting. Well, you're not. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you to do that. I'm just going to tell you to win the race, because then you'll sprint. So
it's finding that different trigger that's going to motivate them to respond in that different way.
Exactly. And it's like Harrison's point earlier, maybe about the focus of don't concentrate on the technical, really know what you're concentrating on here. That's just me as a coach, really knowing what I want to get out of that and what I need the girls to get out of that. But what's the best way for me to sell it to them? Well, the best way for me to sell it to them isn't to stand there like a what they think a traditional S&C coach is and tell them to sprint. Best way for me is to make it fun, so everybody's having a laugh, and actually there's a bit of competition in it, because they all want to compete. So, for example, at the moment, we'll do a lot of stuff around where there's some form of like a 2-part game. So we've got a couple where one girl has to stand on a touch line and they have to protect the line. The other girl, her partner just has to try and get her off the line, however, by any means necessary. So they can pull them, they can push. They just need to be on the line. So we call that winning the line. Okay, and then the context of that is that's a similar situation our girls will find, like maybe at a corner, or where they're marking, or where they're a one-on-one. They're having to protect their space. So then they have to win that battle, and then on go, it'll just be a 10-meter race. And again, the cue for those girls isn't sprint, it's win the race. So our girls, in that practice, in that potentiation, our girls have got 2 cues. They've got win the line and win the race.
From a rugby point of view, could that be a wrestle into then a sprint sort of activity?
Perfect. So that's another one. Another one we've done is the classic. We've done the bear call kind of wrestle. Done this one with the girls at football as well as rugby, where it's a bear crawl kind of tap hands game. So a point for every time you tap the hands, and then on go, it's actually a bear crawl race rather than a stand up and run race, just to give those girls some time to explore that movement and maybe warm up in a different way. And again, the girls at football tend to really enjoy that sort of stuff, because it's not what they traditionally do. They're not traditionally in that position. They're not traditionally doing a warm up like this. And again, ultimately, we're talking about fundamental movement skills. We want to try and make them fun, because like Harrison, that point you made right at the beginning, how do coaches make these, really basic movements fun? Just add some games, add a constraint in that makes it a competition. Kids love that.
Well, I think that comes on to quite this point at the moment is obviously I think we're going to be in this online bubble for a little bit longer than half term. We're not talking politics, but I have a feeling, my personal view is that I think this lockdown is going to go on that little bit longer. You've obviously been online with the girls at Blackburn now doing these same sort of activities. I suppose, first of all, how have you found them, and what would your advice be, or the community coaches that could use this as a real excellent opportunity to develop these skills with their players?
Yeah, I mean, from a club point of view, we've done our best, and I think the girls have definitely enjoyed some aspects of it. But it can never take away from being on field, and especially that social interaction. From my point as a coach, there's been elements to it again that I think have been really good in terms of I've actually been able to see them and make sure that they're okay doing the movements and give them some coaching points. However, again, then it's been really reliant on me to be able to describe or demonstrate what I want them to do, rather than across a call. And as we know with Zoom calls, at some points I've had 20 different screens on. So again, while they're all getting on with their work individually at home, to try and pick out little bits and bobs has been quite difficult. But I mean, the one thing we have done really well as a club is we've engaged parents really well. And so parents have been there to kind of help us along and ask questions and give us feedback, which has been really useful. I think going forward as, say, somebody that's leading a community team and leading a program like this is what ultimately do your participants, I'd call them athletes, what do your athletes or participants want out of your session? If you're at that level of a community coach, it's probably fun and a bit of competition. So again, maybe use the time that you're going to warm them up, because whatever activity you're doing, whether it's via Zoom or in person, we should do a warm up. Maybe that's your time where you can do 10-15 minutes worth of movement skills, and maybe there isn't any competition to that element. There's actually, we're going to look at that quality of movement, and maybe you tally up who has the best quality movement, and when we do get back to being on field, there's some form of prize or reward for having the best movement skills. However, then the rest of your session, you can try and make it fun. So try and add that bit of competition in. So I'll take you one aspect where I've been trying to help the girls continue some of their education around running technique and sprint technique, but disguising it a little bit on the Zoom call. So we talked quite a lot about kind of like having quite a high knee raise in our sprints for the girls as a coaching point, to be able to then put more force into the ground and then ultimately go quicker. So one thing that we did use is married that up on Zoom with a technical practice of just doing toe touches on top of a ball. So obviously you've got to have fairly high knees and a dorsiflexed ankle to be able to bring your foot up, touch the top of the ball and put it back down and do the other one. And then what we just made is that a competition. So we set a minute timer on it as part of a circuit. But the idea was in that minute, they had to try to get to 100. So again, they were doing some element of speed, explosive work, mixed in with a technical practice. And actually they were also then getting some form of, aerobic capacity building out of it, because they were working over a minute. So I think on these Zoom calls, as a coach, it's probably what's the best bang for your buck. How much can you get into? How much can you get into one element of what you're coaching? But again, coming back to your point, Harrison, of what's the focus? So in those instances, what I'm concentrating on is actually kind of knee lift, movement skill. Are the girls kind of working at a rate that is going to get them, some sort of aerobic capacity built? But actually what the girls think they're doing is they're doing a technical practice. So we can do one practice and we can all get what we want out of it. And to be honest, I probably didn't tell the girls what I was focusing on. That'd just come in the form of maybe someone's knee lift isn't quite, high enough. And that'd just be a quick, just get those knees up. Or somebody's not going to reach the 100. Look, it just kind of, can everybody get to 100? Which means they have to work harder. And again, it's just using those coaching cues and those coaching behaviors to shape that focus. But I do understand that doing the stuff on Zoom is a lot. For anybody that is, very dedicated to the coaching, it's very different experience.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
Yeah, I think we're finding that. Yeah, I think we've found that since going on to Zoom. It's keeping them engaged. Every time we start a Zoom call, they seem to be just getting out of bed.
Oh, brilliant.
No, I think it's been really positive there, Sharp. You've gone through some really good points. I think a lot of people will get a lot out of that. Now we're going to end each time we've got a guest on. We're going to have some questions that we're going to ask. So Harrison's lined these up for you this week. So Harrison, over to you, pal.
So there's nothing to catch you out. I said we've come up with an idea just to we've delved deep into some topics there, but we're going to finish with a nice light-hearted question. We thought of different ideas, and we've gone with we're going to give you 3 players, rugby players, that related to S&C in some way, but you've got to make one of them captain. You've got to drop one of them to the bench, and then you've got to kick one of them out the squad.
Oh, brilliant. And it has to be S&C related.
Well, I'm going to give you the 3 players now, and we've tried to come up with 3 S&C players. So we're going to give you James Haskell, because we know that
I knew I was going to get Haskell.
he loves the gym. But then we've gone slightly differently with the next 2. They're more to do with their size. So we've got Manitou Langley, who's naturally big.
Yep.
And we're going to give you someone who's naturally small, so that's Faf de Klerk.
Very good.
And we'd like to, so just give us which one you'd like to make captain, which one you're going to put on the bench, which one are you dropping from your squad completely, and let's give some reasons behind that as well.
Right. Okay. Well, I think straight off the bat, I'm probably going to play Faf and make him captain.
Oh.
Yeah. I think
Is that because he's a scrum half and they're renowned to be, lobby, get in the way, that sort of thing?
Well, no, I'm going to say that, but yeah. Well, at least he'll have a relationship with the referee, won't he? Maybe not good, maybe not bad. So, it can only be better if he's the captain. At least he's got a reason to speak to the referee then.
Yeah, true. He's a fair point.
Having obviously seen him on TV and then having seen him live, even for a smaller player, his physicality is ridiculous. And alongside that is sort of his willingness to put his body on the line as a scrum half in defence is really incredible.
Really sharper on the breakdown as well. Really, finds gaps.
Yeah, I was just about to say, and then we all know that speed kills, and he's got bags of it. So I think he's shoo-in to play and then captain. Then it comes down to the 2 England boys. I think I'd probably bench Haskell.
Oh,
I think Haskell off the bench. He could do bits. He could definitely do bits off the bench. I think the fact that he's obviously a 6.5 and not a 6 or a 7 probably doesn't help the fact that he can start. But he's definitely got, it probably in his own words, he's got an amazing rig, and if anything, he's going to bring some physicality off the bench. So Manu, I'm booting out just based on the fact from my point of view is that he probably isn't physically what he used to be. I think at one point in his career, he was probably a bit of an anomaly physically, whereas, and even at that stage where they trialed playing Manu on the wing, again, he was still probably a bit of an anomaly on the wing. Whereas now I just think the game's caught up with him, and he's, Manu on the wing doesn't look any different to any other winger in the Premiership.
And to be honest, it's probably quite easy to drop because he's always injured.
That was going to be my last point as well. Of his actual availability is probably questionable in terms of injury, but yeah, that's where I go. I go Faf to start and be captain. Haskell off the bench if he's not doing his own 3 or 4 podcasts that he likes to do. He's actually got time to come off the bench, and then Manu unfortunately gets the chop.
Oh, you're tearing up the contract in front of him.
Well, no, let's do that. He's bigger than me, but
no, I think there's some fair rationale there, Sharpie. So no, I just want to first of all thank you again for giving up your time and coming on for this new venture that we've got going. Hopefully, a lot of people benefit from that. We've got your social media stuff below, so people please go follow Sharpie. I'm sure he'd be quite happy to get some questions if you want to bother him. At the end of the day, it's what you want to do, isn't it? It's what your career direction is now around that, and I'm sure knowing what you like, you're quite happy to help as many people as you can, don't you? So thank you again for coming on.
Pleasure, guys. Thank you very much.
Next week we've got another guest coming on. We've got Stuart Dixon from the Yorkshire Rugby Academy. He's going to be coming on to talk us through what they've been doing at the moment, and to also talk to us about the academy program, tips for players, coaches, and parents as well. So that should be quite an interesting chat to just develop that a little bit more about understanding the who, if you wanted to go down that route, around that performance route as well. So thanks again. We'll see you next time.
Take care, guys.
Lovely.